Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I think we're waiting for a few people to join the session. I think the attendees, I can see some people have started arriving, so maybe we'll give it like a couple of minutes for people to join this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you are, and welcome to the class of 2023-2024, so that you will be starting next year. Today, I am joined by Mr. John Gilligan, who is the director of the Finance Lab, who will give us a brief introduction into the Finance Lab. I know some of you who have joined us today may have already got a career in finance or are looking to pivot into finance. So today will be a very insightful and useful information about this program, which is very unique and amazing because it will give you the tools that you need to succeed in the financial services. So without further ado, I think I'm going to pass over to John. I know some people are still joining, but this webinar is being recorded, so it will be sent out to everybody as well. So thank you so much, John, for joining us this morning, and over to you.
Good morning, afternoon, evening. Thank you for making the time. What I'm going to do is just ramble a bit because we can't have a conversation, but if we actually were in the Finance Lab, we'd be talking to each other rather than me talking at you. So let me do a few bits and pieces. The first question you should ask whenever you walk into any lecture theatre in the world is, who the hell am I listening to and why should I give them my time? So you are listening to John Gilligan. I was for 30 odd years a mid-market private equity and M&A practitioner. I'm not an academic, although I do academic work periodically. And my background is I started life in the private equity industry. I was a partner of Deloitte and then BDO for 25 years. And I currently also run an impact investment fund, an impact debt fund of about 100 million, primarily targeted poverty in the UK. It's not climate or development. So that's who I am. And when I came to Oxford 5 years ago, what I pitched to the university was that we should have a practitioner-led bridge between my academic colleagues and the workplace where I came from. And that's what the Finance Lab is. So what I'm going to do is walk you through what we do in the lab. If you want to ask questions, feel free to ask them as we go along. Because I'm presenting from the screen, I can't see you. So if you speak, you'll appear. So forgive me if I'm slightly disembodied. So what is the Finance Lab? As I say, what it is designed to do is to bridge between practice and theory. So you'll learn theory in the core courses across the MBA, and as you go through the MBA, you can choose different pathways. So some will choose finance, general consulting, marketing, whatever pathway you choose. So this program is pointed directly at finance. It is not for the finance curious. It's not for people who are just kind of interested in finance. It's for people who want to have careers in finance. And specifically, we're pointed in this block at mainly transactional corporate finance. So investment banking, M&A, private equity, venture capital, development banking, hedge funds, but generally not trading. So the asset management and trading aspects of finance we cover in a different stream, which we call the Asset Finance Masterclass. So this is where you come if you want to do deals, essentially. So I say it's by practitioners for practitioners. So none of my academic colleagues come through the lecture theatre behind me. All the people who come into the lecture theatre come with a case study. One of the things we've learned over the many years of doing this is that many practitioners are great practitioners, but they're not necessarily great teachers. And the way that we've squared that circle is by using case studies, which we develop with our guests so that we can do the teaching because it's what we do, and they can do the practitioner piece because it's what they do. And so a classic Finance Lab session will be me discussing a case study. You get the case study a week in advance. You'll then be expected to have read it when you walk in the room behind me, and we'll discuss it and analyze what's going on, and it'll lead to a particular dilemma situation or series of situations. We'll then take a break, so that's about an hour or so. And then whoever the person in that case study will walk through the door, typically, and rather than them lecturing, what they will do is they'll have a conversation about the situation we discussed. And the question is, what would you do if you're in that circumstance? So they're real cases by real people, and it means that we can get serious people to come into Oxford and talk about serious problems. We also teach you Excel modeling. Excel modeling is the entry-level skill for all financial jobs. If you can't do Excel modeling, you won't get into the interview process. Every interview process will have a modeling bit to it of some degree or other. And what we did when I came to Oxford 5 years ago is I went to go and talk to a chap called Dennis Coleman, who's now number 2 at Goldman Sachs. And I said to Dennis, who do you use to train your analysts and associates? And he told me the name of the firm. So we then went to that firm and said, would you work with Oxford? And we use those people and we lock you in a room for 3 days of intensive Excel modeling. The idea is that you should be able to pass the entry standard for Goldman's and therefore everybody else, because the entry standard is very similar, for any of the analyst associate jobs. We do that very early on. So it's almost one of the first things we do. And I should say at this point, every year we do this, somebody turns up with an Apple laptop. Most financial institutions don't use Apple laptops. They use Microsoft-based ones. So if you're buying a new machine, buy one with a Microsoft system in it, please. It's not absolutely critical, but generally speaking, investment banks don't use Apple, they use Microsoft. Then what we do is we have this program runs in what we call Michaelmas term, the first term in English. It's 10 weeks and it runs Monday and Tuesday, 5 till 9 in the evening. And you're expected to come to one of those days. Many people come to both. And there are about 20 cases led by the people in the cases. And the important thing about this program compared to anything else you'll do in Oxford is we have a call-out culture. You are expected to participate. And I will turn around to people and say randomly, what do you think in this situation? What's your view of this? And it's slightly embarrassing. People haven't read the case, which sometimes happens. But generally speaking, what we find is once people have got comfortable with trusting each other in a room, because obviously when a group comes together, it's a little bit intimidating for some, that we have very active discussions across the room between both guests and everybody in the room. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to learn by doing. So having said that's what we do, we have this structure called who, what, how, which is how you analyze a case at a high level is who's in the case, what are they doing and how are they doing it. But I'm using this for the purposes of analyzing the lab. So this is the first level analysis of the student group. So you can see there's, I think there's 65 nationalities in this year, but it goes up and down. It's always around there. It is exclusive and highly selective. We only admit 150 people. We can't admit any more, and I won't admit any more. And that's actually determined by the number of people we can train in the modeling classes. It's designed for people with a keen interest in and aptitude for financial markets. So as I said at the start, it's not for people who are interested in finance. People who are interested in finance, we're very happy to talk to you about it. But this is for people who want a career in finance. And when it doesn't work for people, it's because the commitment to do this is quite high and they don't feel they get a return on the commitments because they don't really want a finance career. It's because they're interested in finance rather than wanting to do it. It runs across the courses we run. So we run 3 different postgraduate courses in the school. We run the MBA, one you're looking to join us in. And then we run the Master of Financial Economics and the Master of Law and Finance. And it's a mixture of those courses. It's about 60% MBA, 40% of the others. Everybody goes through the same process, and I'll describe the process in a bit. This is what people want to do before they join. Shortly, I'll show you what they do after they've left. So about 40% odd want to be in investment banking, and about 30% want to join private equity venture capital. Typically, for most people who don't have a finance background, getting into private equity is a 2-step process. You have to get into either the transactional piece of a consulting business or the investment banking business, and then you move into private equity. There are not many people who go straight from any business school in the world straight into private equity, certainly in Europe. It's slightly different in the States because they have associates and programs in some of the big funds these days. So if you want to end up in private equity, you're probably looking at a process that says banking, M&A, or transactional consulting, and then private equity. Increasingly, that's changing. So this year, we have people going direct to private equity, and we've had a few in the last few years. As the funds are getting bigger, they're building their own analyst and associate programs. Historically, they would have recruited straight from investment banks when people were 2 or 3 years in. So that's what people want to do. And this is what they actually do. So this is all the people from 2018 to 2021 that we know what they're doing, which is about 90% of people. So I shamelessly follow people when they leave. And what you can see is, first of all, there's obviously a big tail, bound to be. And about a quarter of people go into M&A, investment banking, asset management. I split VC and private equity out separately. You can see a lot of people go into venture. The consulting piece is generally the transactional, not the strategy piece of the consulting businesses. Corporates often are corporate and corporate development. So it's the M&A activities of organizations. More people do startups. And then you can see the long tail around the corner. So about 80% of our people will go to what's the 80% is here. So private equity, clearly there's some lawyers, so they go to the law. This is generally fintech. This is development banking. So some people want to do transactional corporate finance, but they're not particularly motivated by generating personal wealth. So they're much more interested in development and the impact piece, which I have some sympathy for because that's what I do. But that's the sort of where people land. And obviously they move over time. So some of these people will move ultimately into private equity because they've only just left. So if you compare them side by side, what you can see is that more people want to go into investment banking, M&A type jobs than actually end up there. And that's because it's inherently difficult to get into those roles. It's also because some people realize it's not for them. The worst outcome you can have from going to any elite university in the world is to get yourself into a well-paid job that you hate. You'll end up in a good job anyway because you're you've jumped all the hurdles and you're in the winning team, or you have a number of options ahead of you that other people don't have. So the important thing is to choose the right option for you, and that option should be a combination of what you want out of this financially, and also the fact that you're going to live your life rather than just observe it. The worst outcomes we've had have been where people have got roles in transactional investment banking and they just hated the culture and tempo of that job because it's inherently demanding. A lot of people, as I say, who start off thinking they want to do this actually move into development impact type things. So that's a classic sort of route through it. But the whole point of the program is that we expose you to each of these sectors. And so you get a sense of what they do, how they do it, so that you can filter through these options for yourself and decide which ones you should prioritize. So our rule is you cannot come as a guest unless you are a senior practitioner or an alumni. And senior practitioner, we aim for partners, managing directors, or founders. And these are a selection of guests. I think all are here this year. Yeah, this is this year's guest list. And if I explain some of them at the top, you'll know exactly who they are. So Morgan Stanley, HG is the largest private equity investor in technology in Europe. Managing partner of, so if I tell you who comes, so managing director from Morgan Stanley, the actually managing partner of HG. Goldman, we used to have Dennis Coleman, who's now gone back to the States to be number 2 at Goldman's. And so we now actually have an alum from Goldman's. KKR, we have alumni, and they come either with their private equity group some years, or some years they come with their impact fund. Bank of America, we have a whole team of our this year we had, I think, 3 generations of alumni at different points in their career from Bank of America. We have a close relationship with Bank of America, and we run a thing called the Bank of America Challenge with them, which I'll talk about in a second. Lakestar are one of the largest VC firms in Europe, and Lakestar always take 2 or 3 people on MBA internships, some of whom they look to stay in the fund, some of them go to their investments. I don't know why I've got Aries twice, that's clearly a typo. Aries actually here next week. Aries, it is the managing partner of Europe, Blair Jacobson, and we do 5 mini case studies with Aries, which are 5 credits that they're looking at. And the question is, which one would you do? How would you price it? Those sorts of things. GIC is the sovereign wealth fund of Singapore, and we do the largest property deal ever done in London with them. Hermes GP you might not be familiar with. It is a private equity fund that's predominantly focused on co-investment. we have a number of alumni there, and so Sohan, who's gone there this year, came back, and generally speaking, we'll either have the managing partner or one of our alums. We've got 2 or 3 in there. This year it was one of our alums, I think because Elias, who's the managing partner, was busy that day, but Elias normally comes. UBS come, and Ben Crystal is an MD at UBS. He's also actually on the law faculty here because he was a law student here some years ago. That's areas I've got twice, reasons I don't know. Rothschild, you should know, and we have, I lose track of how many people we have in Rothschilds, 5 or 6 at the moment in the Rothschilds team. They aren't big recruiters of MBAs. They could recruit a lot more of the maths and financial economics and law and finance people. This is a brand I'm going to guess nobody will know, possibly the one below as well. This is a hedge fund called Builders Union. Builders Union is a hedge fund founded by 2 guys, one from KKR, one from EQT, about 7 or 8 years ago, who are again alums. And they're focused entirely on youth investment across the world. So they're our hedge fund. Bain & Co should need no introduction. That's their private equity group. Again, have the head of the private equity group comes with one of our alums, Ollie Ormston. EY Parthenon were in this week. Matt Robb is the managing partner of EY Parthenon, and we do the last deal I did before I ceased to be a practitioner together. And EY, again, take a number of our students every year. Visma, you'll only know if you're a transactor. Visma is actually owned by HG and was the largest software buyout in the world when it was done. It's not anymore. Twitter's rather taken that prize, if you think Twitter's a software deal. The founder of Visma comes, Oyster Moen, with Nick Humphreys, the managing partner of HG, both of whom were genuine billionaires, and talk about a very long relationship between these 2 businesses. August Equity is a mid-market private equity fund run by a friend of mine. And Hackett we're here this week. Nina Frost, who's partner there, talks about what Hackett do. You won't have heard of them because Hackett were founded by the former head of MI6 and GCHQ, which is the government's technology and spying agencies. And what they do is very, very deep due diligence. We also have an array of founders, company doctors, judges, headhunters, etc., all of whom are senior people at the top of the game. So that's who comes. What do? We do 2 things. The reason people fail is often on the right-hand side of that slide as I look at it, which is they have an image of themselves that is different to the image that we as recruiters would have. All of you are perfectly capable of getting a job. If you can get into the university, you can get into any of these banks. You'll have the intellectual capacity to do the job because you just will. The reason that you'll get the job or not get the job will be because you fit into their team and you have a self-awareness that means you'll get through their process. Most people who fail the processes fail on team working or the lack of self-awareness. So what we're trying to do is to encourage the left-hand side and discourage the right-hand side. And I say the way we do that is by case study. So I'll just skip over this. This is the, I'm sure some of you will have heard this, Malcolm Gladwell, the man with the funniest hair in academia. Oh, we're recording this. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. So there's a 10,000 hours conjecture, which is like many models, it's not perfect, but it has some useful learnings for us. And what that says is the key to success in any field is to a large extent a matter of practicing. And the specific number that Gladwell has in his book is this 10,000 hours thing. And what this course is about is being the first 10,000 hours, the first part of that 10,000 hours of learning how to be a corporate financier. So like all sweeping generalizations, it's only directionally valuable. It's not true. You don't need 10,000 hours to do certain things. And you can go and see the arguments about this all over the internet and elsewhere. But it's a useful idea to have. We learn by doing. We don't learn by lecture. This is the only time you'll have to listen to an hour of me talking. It's no more fun for me than it is for you generally if I talk a lot. What we do is we encourage people to get their hands dirty. So this is learning by doing. And if that's not your bag, then this isn't for you. because you have to commit to that. I'm going to get involved, because we have the call out culture, which means I'm going to turn around and say, what do you think to this in this situation? Normally early on, because it's quite nerve-wracking being in that room with a whole lot of people you've only just met, I have to do a bit of gentle coaching. But by this point in the term, so we're about halfway through the first term now, I don't have to worry about any of that. Everybody's comfortable with where they are. The level of trust in the room is high, and so people are very happy to participate. But the idea, as I say, is you read the case, we discuss the case, we learn by doing. And the reason for that is not just because I like pictures of kids' dirty hands. There is some actually academic rigor behind what we're doing here. This pyramid, which you'll hear me talk about if you come to Oxford and join the course, was developed by a physics professor, and I should know his name, but it's gone out of my head, and it's very embarrassing because he has a Nobel Prize in Stanford. And the question he was asking was, when he was standing at the front of one of these lectures, is what percentage of what I'm saying when I'm lecturing is actually going into the head of the students I'm talking to? And this medium actually is even worse than standing behind a lectern talking. In this medium, you're probably getting less than 5% of what I'm saying. If you were in the room with me and we were doing hands-on, if we were doing this stuff, you'd be getting 50 to 75% of what we're doing. So the proportion that you retain from being in a learning environment increases very rapidly as you become participative and move away from lecturing. And the great thing about this pyramid actually is that the person who's learning most in the room is normally me, because the person at the front is actually learning about 90%. We have to order our thoughts in order to talk about them, which is a lot of what learning's about. So the idea behind our methodology is that we try and increase the amount of retention of information by doing. And that means that when you start, it's very disorientating for some people who are only used to living in the lecturing, reading, traditional university method. We learn by osmosis in the finance lab. Early on, you probably will be, unless you have a background in finance, you might not even know what the nouns I'm using are. By now, week 5, we're in week 6, whatever. We're in a position where everybody's comfortable with what we're talking about. So there's a learning curve you go up that some people find slightly uncomfortable. Once people get to the top of it, it kind of all makes sense. So I have to say, generally speaking, I learn more than anybody by doing the finance lab, which is pretty good for me. We make all MBAs do one of these 2 challenges, the Bank of America challenge, which actually I have to judge this afternoon because the entries came in this morning. We have dinner with them and their MDs on Friday next week, I think it is. So this is a challenge where you have to identify LBO targets done in teams of 4. 3 teams go down to London to present to the MDs of Bank of America, and there's a cash prize for winning it, and you have dinner with, the winners have dinner with the MDs down in London. The Hermes challenge has been going now for, I think, about 10 years. And that again is team challenge. You have to do one or other. You can do both if you like. And that is an analysis of a co-investment opportunity in a private equity fund. The prize for that again is, first of all, you get into the final round of their interview process for their associate program. And as I say, last year's team that won this, one of those members is now at Hermes, again, there's a presentation. We compete against London Business School and Cambridge in that one. And the winning team, we go down and have dinner with them down in the city in London, and the winning team's announced, and there's a cash prize for that one from memory. So you have to do one or other of those if you come into the lab. So give me this, if there's background noise, there's some builders near me. So what I thought I'd do is finally leave you with a thought that's useful. This is all just about process, but I thought I'd give you some thoughts on value. Value is kind of at the heart of everything to do with corporate finance. Corporate finance is about essentially valuing things and deciding, do I want to buy them or sell them, in very simple terms. And this slide you'll see early on in a couple of courses I run. So supply and demand causes the value of everything. You kind of all know that, or you sort of know it at some level. If you're an economist, you know it at a deep level. If you're not, you'll know it intuitively anyway. And there's a subset of assets in the world that are financial assets. And financial assets are just assets that you value using cash flows. That's kind of the definition of what a financial asset is. And you value them using this net present value formula. So the present value of set of cash flows is the cash flow divided by 1 over the interest rate of the parity. Don't worry about the maths. Nobody cares about it at this point in the process, but if you're doing anything to do with corporate finance, if you understand that, you're well on your way. This formula is wrong. And it's wrong in a way that's kind of damaging to the understanding of corporate finance, because whilst it's the queen of formulas for corporate finance, what it doesn't do is it doesn't express itself in the way it should do, because it should say that. What it should say is that the present value of cash flows are the expected cash flows, so 1 over the expected interest rate at the expected time these cash flows arrive. And that's important, because as soon as you think about them as expected values, you start to understand what your role in the marketplace is. Your role in the marketplace is either to assess the expectations of others or to change the expectations of others. Because if you change the expectations of other people, you change the value of assets today. And what we do in transactional corporate finance is we change people's expectations. If we're selling businesses, we're trying to increase their expectations. If we're buying them, we're trying to reduce their expectations. So what we do, and importantly, how we do it, changes the value of assets. And that's the core idea at the heart of what we're doing in the Finance Lab, is we're learning not only how to manipulate numbers in a formula written incorrectly, we're also understanding that those numbers are expectations and other people will have expectations about them. And then we're trying to figure out how to behave, what to say, when to say it, in order to change other people's expectations so that you change the value of an asset. And that's the absolute heart of transactional corporate finance. It's not just about analysis, it's about the bigger picture and the other people involved in the situation you're in. So the way that we approach corporate finance is not the way my colleagues in the academic courses do, which is to take that core formula and blow it out in a way that's academically rigorous. What we do is we come from the top down, from what's the situation we're in, and then we get down to the value. And what we're trying to do is to understand who the other people are in the situation, what are they thinking, what do we do, how do we affect how they think. When we do that, we change the value of things. So I've been talking about half an hour, which is way too long to listen to somebody talking on the internet. Application process, I'll canter through quickly because you can always get this online anyway. These dates were this 22 dates, so they'll be about the same in 23. We haven't yet done them. So about February, the application opens. About July is when you have to get them in. I then have a few weeks to review them. If you're accepted, you have to do some online courses on Wall Street Prep. Basically, what we make you do is we make you do a spreadsheet course so that you've learned something useful for that spreadsheet examination process of the investment banking applications. And we also make you do a corporate finance online exam, and we use that as the entry criteria. We try and make that process relevant to getting jobs in investment banking and M&A, because then you're getting some value out of the process as well. So we use those as the hurdle. There's two reasons why I do that. One, because I want people to commit to the course. So by giving you a task that requires you to invest time, effort into the course, there's a mutual commitment between you and me, because I have to work hard to do this. What I don't want is people signing up and then dropping out because they've overcommitted. So think hard before you commit. If you commit, there'll be some work involved. And at that point, I shall stop and ask for any questions. I'll probably stop sharing the screen as well, because I can't see anybody if I'm sharing screens, but very happy to answer any question anybody has.
Thank you, John. Yes, that's been really useful and very insightful. We have some of our attendees today. If you have any questions, please, could you please pop them either in the chat or on the Q&A box below. We will answer any questions that you have. But John, I actually have a question. I guess I can kickstart before people start typing their own questions. In terms of the length of the sessions, I understand there are 2-hour sessions. How often do you meet? How many hours would the MBA student would have to commit a week to the Finance Lab?
Okay, so the Finance Lab runs, I say, on Monday and Tuesday. and we start at 5:15 and we run through to about 6:45. I am notoriously bad at timekeeping. And so it becomes a running joke that people have to tell me what the time is, as indeed Flo will have to tell me shortly, I'm sure, because I'll forget. So the first part is about an hour and a half, and the second part is about an hour or so. And then we have drinks with the guest. So whoever the guest is, you will also have, I should have said that in the course of the presentation, is that those guests often will bring HR people as well as themselves. Otherwise, you have one guest and 60 people. So the commitment is to read the case. Some cases are quite long, most of them quite short. So we start with short ones and then they become more complex. And they'll take people about an hour or so a week of just preparation. Best thing to do is to work in teams and get some of your friends to help you out, because that's kind of what the MBA is about on one level. And then it's Monday evening or Tuesday evening, or both.
Okay.
There's a few questions in the chat, so let me go through these. Is the Finance Lab graded? No, it's not. Well, the reason that we have the freedom to do what we do is because it doesn't count for credits and it's not graded. That gives us an enormous amount of freedom to go where we want. It's a conscious decision by the Dean when I came here. So when I first came here, the Dean said to me, the great luxury you have, John, is that you can do anything you like as long as it's kind of educationally useful and gets people towards a career, because it's not being graded. So that's my great luxury, which many of my colleagues envy my freedom. I also teach some graded courses as well.
There was the second part of the question was, does it offer credits?
No.
No, not either. Good.
Do we have a breakdown of career outcomes for MBAs? Yes, of course we do. So the breakdown between MBAs and MFEs, MLS. So if we break those three separately, so clearly more lawyers go to law and no finance people go to law because they're not qualified to do it. The investment banks will target the MFE group very actively. So one of the things I quite often say when I'm talking to employers is that the MFEs are probably, after the computer science PhDs, the most employable people in the university. They are incredibly employable. And they typically, there's about 60 on the MFE, I think about 40 of them will be in the lab, something like that. Of those, about, I don't know, 25 will go to investment banking, 15 might go to consulting, that sort of thing. The MBAs is much more diverse because the group is more diverse when it comes in. We have taken things like, so if I give you examples, so we took a professional rugby player who's now an M&A banker. We took a army officer and who's now a private equity consultant at Bain. We took the finance director of a business in Slovakia who's now just joined UBS, actually not joined UBS, he's joined a different investment bank. It's one of his cohort who joined UBS. So we do convert people from A to B, but converting people into investment bankers with no finance background is hard. And you should be under no illusions that that is difficult. It's much more easy to take somebody from McKinsey and take them into Goldman's or vice versa, because employers are as brand conscious as you are. So this is a finance lab for finance people. In the application process, does not having a finance hinder? Yes, is the honest answer. So it's a finance lab. So clearly, if you're have a finance background, it's helpful. But there are people, as I say, who we took a rugby player who Ben Ransom, who'd been a professional rugby player and won the Premier League and captain. He played for England, I think, at that point. He captained us in the varsity match, and now Ben is doing the M&A. In my opinion, our MBA is pivoting from non-finance to a strong position to navigate finance recruiting in the UK. So we bring in Walker Hamill, who are one of the leading recruitment firms in private equity investment banking, to talk about private equity recruiting particularly. And the analysis is that the bigger the number of hops you're making from where you are, the harder it gets. And you'll hear this a lot from my colleagues in the recruitment and careers parts, and you hear it in every university in the world. So if you're going from investment banking in California and want to go to London, that's relatively easy. If you want to go from tech in California to investment banking in London, that's 2 hops because you're changing geography and changing sector. That's harder. It sort of depends what you were doing in tech. Essentially, the the closer you've been to doing a deal, the easier it is to get a role in the world of transactional corporate finance. So if you've been in McKinsey in the strategy group, it's not as easy if you've been in the private equity group. If you've been in Bain in the private equity group, then you could probably go straight to private equity and not even bother with the investment banking piece. So it depends where you are. And implicit in your question is you understand that there's a difficulty. Quantifying it's hard because it depends a lot on you as well. So people who dedicate themselves to doing it, it's perfectly possible. But we all live in the real world. What are the Wall Street prerequisite courses? I don't know because I haven't decided yet because we change them year to year. When you come to Oxford, you have access to Wall Street Prep, I think forever. I think it's you permanently have access to it. And what I try and do is balance the amount of time that people are being asked to commit to the entry process with also the value you're getting out of the course. So I'm trying to pick a course, and I do it with Wall Street Prep, and sometimes they guide us to their new courses and say this is a course that feels like it's right. I don't always get it right. So I think a couple of years ago, we in the pandemic, we asked people to commit too much time. So we changed it this year. So it goes up and down. But generally speaking, it will be something XLE, so build a model. And it will possibly, depending on what mood I'm in, be something to do with either accounting, if I think that that's where, depends what feedback we're getting from the employers. If they're saying, you know, your people are really strong in modeling, but they're not strong in, I know, something else, then we lean on that. So it might be accounting-ish, or it'll be something to do with valuation. So comparable companies analysis, comparable transactions, or some sort of DCF stuff. But the point is to make it useful for the job you're going for, not just to create a task for the sake of it.
Okay. We're waiting to see if there's any more questions, but I have one more question. How closely did the Finance Lab work with the recruitment team? I know that you mentioned that on Tuesdays, Mondays and Tuesdays, when you finish a session, you would have your guests and they often would bring their HR. It would be like an opportunity to kind of like mingle, network and with the recruiters from those specific banks or funds. Would that be something that is also available to people who maybe didn't make the Finance Lab cut? No, it's a very exclusive.
What we're offering to the people who come is a concentrated group of people who've put the effort in to get into the environments.
Absolutely.
We work closely with my colleagues in the careers group. In fact, John Madrick and I talk all the time. In fact, John comes to many of my sessions, who's the head of recruitment in finance in Oxford. So we are, we're intimately working with recruitment people, and often if somebody's interviewing with, so we had one of our finance staff people was interviewing with Houlihan Lokey last week. So she came to me after we'd done a session, which it wasn't Houlihan weren't here last week, somebody else was. Can't remember who it was. EYP and Hackett last week. Can't remember. Bain and somebody else. She came to me and said, I've got an interview with Houlihan tomorrow. Can you help me? And so I texted one of our alumni who's now in the States, a guy called Marcus. And so I asked Marcus, could you just have a chat with my colleague here? And Marcus then had a chat. He talked her through the interview process he went through. So she went to her interview having spoken to somebody who'd done it last year. Often John the careers group will have been downloaded all of the questions that were asked by each of the banks every year. So we normally have a pretty good idea what they did last year. They change it because they never do that. That's what we do. So we try to guide people and help people. And sometimes, some of the people will walk through the door. So Ben Crystal of UBS is very helpful with people trying to apply to UBS. So most of the people coming through are there to help.
Okay, thank you. We have some more questions.
Yeah. Other than Wall Street Prep, do you recommend other course students? So the thing I always recommend, and I don't have a copy of it I'm in my office at home, not obviously sitting in front of a lecture theatre. The best book for reading prior to coming to any of these finances is the essays of Warren Buffett, particularly if you're not a finance person. And the reason is because they're written in his particularly folksy style, so they're non-academic. They're very easy and accessible, and it's the sort of thing you can read actually for fun, because they're quite funny if you're interested in finance. So if you read the essays of Warren Buffett, and they're not heavy going, you can read a chapter a month and you have read the whole thing, then you'll get a good sense of how this theoretical stuff fits into the real world. And as I say, it's very accessible. KKR, we always get to the I want a job in KKR question. Organizations for KKR investing in renewable projects. Do we have a, yes, so KKR, I actually did their first deal they did in Europe when they first came to Europe when I was in my old job. They were once my client. Yes, we know the KKR team and the impact team in particular come. How would I rate placement opportunities and salary in impact investing? So it depends what you mean by impact investing. Impact covers everything from what I do. I do social impact. So our people are, I was actually pitching for money yesterday. So I was pitching to the UK government yesterday morning. And I was asked this question, are you, impact investing, that's not for profit, isn't it? And I said, yes, it's not for profit, but it's also not for loss. So where we are in that bit of the spectrum, incomes in that part are not clearly investment banking levels. KKR's impact team is KKR's impact team who pays what KKR's private equity team pays. So there's a whole spectrum from commercial thematic impact investing, which is what KKR are doing, through to what we do in Big Issue Invest, which is much more social. It's closer to charities and social enterprises. And income clearly falls as you go from A to B. And there are all points in between. So we have, in the UK, we have a wholesale investor called Big Society Capital, which is sponsored by the government. We have 4 MBAs in there from previous years. They pay less than if they'd gone to CDC, which is one of the development banks, or Actis or Leapfrog, who are kind of a bit higher, but they will pay less than, I don't know, UBS, Goldman's, Rothschild, or whatever. Is there a lot of maths? No, I'm not very good at maths. Don't worry about it. There isn't any. The maths is all elsewhere in the academic courses. As I quote a former KPMG partner I knew who used to always say, the thing about being an accountant is that you can add up and subtract, but any kind of multiplication is just magic. So don't worry about maths. No. Can international international is irrelevant because 65%, there's 65 nationalities today. I don't care what country I'm by. One of the great luxuries I have, in fact, one of the things we were talking about earlier on in the week in the class here, was Hackett, this business I mentioned earlier on, which is the business that does very deep due diligence, founded by people from the secret services of the UK. What they do is they build networks of people across the world. And as I point out, when you do my job for a living, you don't need to do that because you've got 65 nationalities walking through the door every year. So we have, by coming into the finance lab, you become part of that. I think of the people in the finance lab not as students, but as members. And what I expect people to do is to things like Marcus did for his successes this year is, you might get a call from me a few years later saying, we've got somebody who needs a hand in your sector. Can you give them 10 minutes of your time? And that's what we're trying to build. We're trying to build something that's a shared experience across the place, all over the world, where people can pick the phone up and go, you don't know me, but I once stood in a classroom that you'll be familiar with. Can I have a chat with you? And that people feel comfortable to do so. Yes, people do recruit directly from the finance lab, but we're not running a parallel career service. What we're doing is doing something that feeds the career funnel. So classically, if you're applying to the investment banks, the investment bank recruitment process starts very early. So if you're going to apply to the banks or the big consulting firms, the way that their process works is that they open their process normally at the beginning of the summer or middle of the summer, July, August time, for some of them, and they fill as they go. So what they do is to try and capture people and tie them down as fast as they can. So you need to be in the application process for the associate programs of investment banks before you actually even arrived in Oxford often. So what we do there is, first of all, make sure people get in the process. And then once they come, I work with John and his team. He's got 3 or 4 people, Ben and Sean, and we make sure those people get into the process. So actually, one of the people sent me an email this morning, a guy called Tosin. Tosin's at Bank of America now. He's been there 4 or 5 years. He's now running the Bank of America Challenge in Bank of America for us. And Tosin memorably, I stopped him in the corridor in my first year here and said, "Have you sent in your Bank of America application?" He said, "Well, I was going to do it next week." I said, "Get it in this week, because otherwise they're going to be full. And if he hadn't got it in, they would have been full. They wouldn't be doing what he's doing now." Beyond, you want to talk about Brexit?
I don't know, some people are getting intense.
I don't mind talking about anything you don't want to talk about. I can talk about these things. Beyond finance, what are my thoughts on the attractions of the UK as a financial hub after Brexit and the bungled government policy? What do you think the challenges the UK as a country will face? That's a big question. How long you got? London is the biggest financial market in our time zone, and it has no credible competitor at the moment. That is stable forever. Clearly, the EU will wish to consider Frankfurt and Dublin's doing things, etc., etc. I didn't vote for Brexit, which may colour my judgment. I don't think many of my colleagues did. I don't necessarily disagree with your analysis of the government policy, but it's probably not for me to talk about that. That's not what the Finance Lab's for. But the summary is London will continue to be the biggest financial market in some things. And that's where most of our people go. I didn't put up the geography slide. About 50% of our people will end up in London. Does the career team forms that I'd be recruiting for arrive? Yes, we talk to you. What I do is I generally force feed you the applications. So what will happen is I'll get a contact from the bank saying, "We're opening the applications this week, John," and I will then send those applications to all the people who are applying to the Finance Lab saying, "You probably should be aware this is happening," and then you pick it up and run with it. Is financial modelling necessary? Yes. Financial modelling is a necessary entry criteria for any job in any bit of the financing world. So yes, but we do teach you. We teach you both online in the first part, and then, as I say, intensively when you come here. Do I see a trend who want to be in peace? Yes, is the answer. So the classic route into private equity has always been investment banking, or in Europe it's slightly different. So in the States, it was generally investment banking into private equity, and that's because the private equity industry in the States came out of investment banking. In Europe, it's slightly different, although it's becoming more similar, and that is there is an investment banking into the large buyout funds, so the big name funds, KKRs, Advents, Carlyle's, Blackstone's, etc. That route has generally been investment bank, but there's also two other routes. One is the consulting route, which is becoming bigger and bigger. So anybody who's done transactional consulting, so the private equity groups of those consulting businesses. So this year was the first time we brought the Bain private equity group into the Finance Lab. Normally we would have left them in the consulting group because we have a consulting stream as well. We brought them in because they are now a direct route into private equity. And the other route is any mid-market M&A private equity, M&A corporate finance boutique. So I'd say I've done, I don't know, around about 100 private equity transactions in my career, and I spent my life living in large accounting firms. So the large accounting firms are very active in Europe in M&A. They're not in the States for regulatory reasons. So there are differences in financials, in structure of markets in different places. So a number of our people will go into mid-market advisory businesses like Houlihan, PJT, Rothschilds, DC Advisory, the Big Four, and they will do mid-market, and then they'll go into the mid-market private equity world. This is the thing that's hardest for people to get their mind around. One of the reasons that private equity is difficult to get into is because it doesn't have a structured hiring program. The investment banks have an entirely structured process. So you can see where the door is, you can see what the process is. It happens every year. And the only thing that varies is how many people they bring in. So they increase and decrease the amount of people they're recruiting. And they talk to the same universities every year. So we have a relationship manager in the MBA recruiting banks in London. We know them, they know us. We email each other, we talk to them. There's no equivalent in KKR, although KKR is actually not a great example because they're in the process of developing a European associate program now, and we're talking to them about it. So one of the reasons that people don't go directly into private equity is because private equity tends to recruit when they've raised a new fund. So they don't have this annual cycle. They have it in New York, but they don't have it in London. VC is slightly different because VC, there are a few internship type programs which convert. So there is a door you can go. So Lakestar, for example, come here because they're actively looking to recruit, and they only come to Oxford for reasons that are to do with the culture of their business. They like the people that come from us. Impact is closer to IB. So some of the impact banks will have a recruitment process so Actis has one, CDC has one, Leapfrog has one. And again, we know the people. Some of them are ex-colleagues of mine, so they're people I know personally. But there are other bits of the impact investing world, which are much more like the private equity world. So, for example, KKR's recruitment for their impact investing fund is driven by when the fund's raising. So it's a slightly complicated picture. If it wasn't, you wouldn't need us to guide you through it, I guess. So that's sort of our job, is to guide you through it. So once you hear that, we'll point you in the right direction. A lot of firms come on campus that don't come in the finance lab. So there are people who come. So there are constantly careers things going on site, and not everybody who's doing that will come through this door. So Bank of America will also do a pure recruitment process, but it's very different to what we're doing. We're much more. This is not a recruitment vehicle. It's an educational vehicle with a recruitment leaning. So we're trying to teach you something, not just have them come along and tell you how their recruitment process works, because I don't care. You do, I don't. How does the finance lab compare to similar things at Cambridge? They haven't got this in Cambridge. They have nothing like this at Cambridge at all. I know the Cambridge people pretty well. Obviously, it's a great university. It's an obvious alternative to us. I also know LBS well. I know the people who teach all the private equity courses there. I went there myself. LBS has nothing like this. Cambridge's or LBS's closest things are sort of student clubs, which are very different to what we do. Nobody else does this for reasons that are to do with the strategy of those universities. We do the finance lab for a number of reasons. First, because with a one-year MBA, we need to intensively do the finance piece early. So it's partly about the structure of our course compared to our competitors would be NCED or LBS or any other university in the States. If we're competing with two-year MBA programs to get our students into the process with the banks, requires us to put in intensive effort in. So this is, this is an expensive and time-consuming process, and that's the level of investment we're putting in, trying to get you to where you want to be, and that's why we do it.
Thank you so much. I think that we'll leave it there. I think we have had a lot of questions, and John, thank you so much for answering them. Like, people were very keen in learning. 17 questions you've answered live now. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And once again, thanks, John, for your participation. It's been really useful, and I hope that you guys, if you are definitely thinking of applying, well, now you know a bit of the requirements and what you should be preparing for over the next few months. So you are all very lucky. You've got your offers, so you should be preparing and considering what programs, what co-curriculars, what things you will be choosing for the next stage of your MBA.
I mean, my tips is go talk to the people who are here and have been here. They're easy to find. Just go ask them, have a chat with them, and they'll tell you that the true version of the world. And if it's any different to what I said, well, I'd be surprised, but it's possible. Who knows?
Yeah.
Thank you for all the questions. I appreciate it. Me talking to a screen is never any fun if nobody comes back to me. And best of luck. Hope to see you in the classroom.
Thank you, John. And don't forget, for those who are here, we also have another session later today with a Q&A with admissions and the visa team. And tomorrow you'll have the opportunity to also join the careers team session, an alumni panel, and a last networking session event in the afternoon. So we hope to see you all later and tomorrow. And thanks again for joining us. Thanks, John. Have a good rest of your day.
Cheers. Thanks all.